Good afternoon and welcome back. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. As the Russian delegation arrived in Anchorage, Alaska, President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are airborne on their way to the meeting set to begin at 9:30 p.m. CET. As we get closer to the summit, we will be bringing you more on what it could mean for Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said it was important that Friday's Russia-US summit in Alaska opened up a path towards a just peace and that Ukraine is counting on America to bring a just and lasting end to Russia's war. Joining me with more is our correspondent Alex Kadier in Kyiv. So Alex, what have we heard from President Zelenskyy so far?
Well, we've heard from the Ukrainian president that they are counting, as you said, on the United States. He wants these talks to lead to a just and lasting peace. Of course, those words geared at the fact that the Ukrainian perspective is that Russia will just invade again and will use any ceasefire or pause in the conflict to rebuild, to rearm, and to be able to hit Ukraine even harder after any pause. That is the concern from the Ukrainian side. So really counting on the US, on Donald Trump, not to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine. We also heard, of course, Claudia, from the US president himself. He said that there is no interest in doing business until the war is settled. That was a concern as well from the Ukrainian side. They saw the Russian delegation going with a lot of business representatives and officials. The US president saying, I notice he's bringing a lot of business people from Russia, and that's good. I like that because they want to do business. But we are not doing business until we get this war settled. We also heard from the US president that the US could be part of security guarantees for Ukraine in any peace agreement, but not for NATO membership. Some words of support, including on territorial swaps. The US president saying they will be discussed, but that decision has to be made by Ukraine. And he says that Ukraine will make a good decision on those discussions. So the US president there may be less skeptical, less Russia-friendly than he has been in the past. A little bit of hope, therefore, for the Ukrainian side, but still some tension, some concern among the presidential circle, among President Zelensky's officials, because they worry still a deal may be done without them.
We know that Russia keeps on attacking Ukraine ahead of the meeting, which is set to take place today. Can you give us more details on what areas were targeted and what are the numbers behind the attack?
Yeah, absolutely. We heard from the Ukrainian Air Force about the last 24 hours. It intercepted 63 of 97 Russian drones overnight, just in the last night. And there were multiple regions, including the Kharkiv Oblast, Sumy Oblast, Donetsk, and more recently, just in the last few hours, in Dnipro, where we understand one man was killed. In Kharkiv, 4 were killed, 2 injured in that region in the last 24 hours. We've also seen in Sumy Oblast, a 32-year-old man was injured by an FPV drone. In Kherson, what is being called here the human safari continues, with multiple attacks on civilians by Russian drones, chasing them around the streets, chasing their vehicles. So, of course, a very relevant question, I have to say, Claudia, in these discussions. A lot of Ukrainians feel like there are talks of peace, negotiations between the US president and his Russian counterpart, but at the same time, the town of Dobropilya in Donetsk, in Donbass, I should say, in the east of the country, rapidly being evacuated by Ukrainian forces because of the Russian threat. And those drones and 2 missiles in the last 24 hours fired from Russia onto Ukraine, not particularly indicating an appetite for peace. Claudia.
Thank you. That was Alex Kadier reporting live from Kyiv. U.S. President Donald Trump said he spoke on the phone to his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko ahead of the Alaska summit. According to Trump's post on his social media site, Truth Social, Vladimir Putin's visit to the United States was one of the topics discussed. Trump wrote in the post that the purpose of the phone call was to thank Lukashenko for the release of 16 political prisoners and urge the release of 1,300 more. Quote, "Our conversation was a very good one," Trump said, adding, "I look forward to meeting President Lukashenko in the future." Since Trump took office, the administration in Washington has been attempting to establish friendly relations with the self-proclaimed Belarusian dictator. After the visit of U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg to Minsk in June, the Lukashenko regime freed multiple political prisoners, including former presidential candidate Sergei Tsikhanouski. According to Belarusian news agency Beta, Lukashenko invited Donald Trump and his family to Minsk, and the U.S. president accepted the invitation. Top Russian officials have arrived in Anchorage, Alaska, ahead of President Vladimir Putin. Their arrival is in advance of the high-stakes summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. The meeting, primarily between Putin and Trump, aims to discuss a potential peace deal in Ukraine, even as Kyiv remains excluded from the talks. The delegation arriving in Alaska includes high-ranking officials such as Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and economic negotiator Kirill Dmitriev, alongside others. Vladimir Putin is expected at 9 p.m. CET tonight, following a stop in Madagan, about 3,000 kilometers from Anchorage. Donning a USSR shirt, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also arrived in Anchorage, Alaska, ahead of the highly anticipated talks between President Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin.
Lavrov is part of the Russian delegation set to accompany Putin during the visit. Trump and Putin are to first hold one-on-one talks behind closed doors, accompanied only by their translators. The talks are then to continue in the expanded format, including the Russian delegation. The Russian leader will also be joined by his presidential aide, Yuri Ushakov, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belosov, Finance Minister Antony Siluanov, and the CEO of Russia's direct investment fund, Kirill Dmitriev. The summit will take place at the U.S. Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk weighed in on the Trump-Putin meeting to take place in Alaska on Friday on the social media platform X.
August 15th is a good day for talks with Russia about war and peace. On this day, 105 years ago, during the Battle of Warsaw, Poles stopped the Red Army in its march on Europe. Luckily, we didn't know that Russia is invincible, and we beat them. Peace through strength, nothing else.
Russia is not undefeatable, said Polish President Karol Nawrocki on Friday at Polish Armed Forces Day Parade. The holiday is celebrated on the 15th of August in commemoration of Poland's 1920 victory over Soviet Russia at the Battle of Warsaw.
Zwycięstwo nad bolszewikami.
The victory over the Bolsheviks in 1920 taught us an important lesson. It taught us that today's neo-imperial Russia, any Russia, because today's Russia isn't much different from its Soviet predecessor, is not undefeatable. That's what the heroes of 1920 tell us, and I want our officers and soldiers today to hear it. Russia is not undefeatable.
Drodzy Państwo, Rosja jest oczywiście zagrożeniem.
Of course, Russia is a constant threat, and that may not change. But I will continue to say that our history, our collective memory, and our modernization efforts have to make us believe that we are ready to build up our potential, that we can feel safe, and that our main enemy is not undefeatable.
Attempts at identifying football fans of Israeli football club Maccabi Haifa responsible for displaying anti-Polish slogans, including murders since 1939 during Wednesday's match against Raków Częstochowa in Debrecen, Hungary, are ongoing, Polish Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński said on Friday. The incident has prompted condemnation from top Polish officials, as well as the Israeli embassy in Warsaw, which also denounced the banner.
Following yesterday's display of shameful banners and cards by Israeli fans in Debrecen, the Polish police has requested that Hungarian authorities identify those responsible for anti-Polish slogans. We are counting on Hungarian assistance in this matter.
Today, Japan is commemorating the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, an annual ceremony marking the country's surrender. Attendees observed a moment of silence to honor those who had lost their lives. At the national ceremony held in Tokyo, Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako led prayers for the deceased and reflected on the hardships Japan faced during and after the conflict. The emperor expressed hope that the stories of those times will continue to be passed down to future generations. Following this, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba further highlighted the role of the younger generation, who lack first-hand experience of the war in understanding its consequences and committing to lasting peace. And so this would be all the latest news for now here on World News. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you back soon here on TVP World.